invite Severine, who has been working on her dissertation on the Chinese Indian community, especially the ones who are the returnees, and she will talk about these returnees.
Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank all the organizers for having this event. I think all the Chinese, the members of the Chinese community who are present here from Kolkata and Delhi would say that I think this is a unique event ever to be held in India, I think. I don't know, I've never had the experience of having any such event being held in India, any news of such an event. So I'd really like to thank ICS and ICC for having this event, and thank you so much. My presentation is about the returnees. We've been talking a lot about the returnees. Now, it's about a small group of people of Chinese origin who were deported, were either deported or deported or left voluntarily, also voluntarily, like Rita said, that's debatable, after the 1962 Sino-Indian War. My intention while speaking about this group of people is not to debate about the political whys and wherefores of the war, but to bring to light the experiences of this group and the price that they had to pay on the sidelines as a result of the war. These group of people were either deported or left under coercion, like made to sign or put a thumbprint on saying that we voluntarily decide to leave. But there were others also who actually truly voluntarily left because the situation socially and economically was just not viable to continue to stay in India, or as they felt that time. Now, the term returnees is again very debatable term. It's been used very often, like we have been using this evening. It's not only used by academics, but also by the Chinese government. They call them Kui Qiao. Kui means to who are returned, and Qiao means overseas Chinese. So it's a term which is very well used, widely used, but it's not actually true in most of the cases. Returnee, in our understanding, would be somebody who was there and returned. But most of these returnees who actually went back to China had never been to China. They all grew up, born and brought up in India, as we are talking about now. Of course, there were returnees from other countries as well in China, which I'll talk about later. So these are the few things which I'm going to discuss in my presentation. Why it all began. It began with the war, of course, in 1962. I'll tell you a little bit about Dioli. It has been spoken of quite often this evening, but maybe some more light could be shed on that. The other thing which I would touch upon is the overseas Chinese farms. Now, these returnees were settled in these farms, or in Chinese it's called Nong Chang. Nong means farm, and Chang means an area. And then finally, I end with the story of Ling Yue Hao. Ling Yue Hao is a lady I met in China while I was on my field trip there in Yunnan province. And this is basically my framework for today's presentation. So I don't think I need to speak a lot about the war and how long it lasted and all that. But the only thing I think which needs to be highlighted was that the war actually was very brief. It was only 1 month long. So it was not that this protracted war which affected people in a hugely symbolic or actual way. But it was a very, very brief war, only 1 month long. But how it changed not only the relationship between two of the largest countries in the world today, but also the small, like we've been talking about minuscule minorities here, how it changed the lives of these people. So suddenly thousands of Chinese, and I would like to say Chinese Indians, because I think it's time now to not classify Indian the Chinese as classify Indians to say we are Chinese. I think we are Indians now, and Chinese is a classification for us. So I think it's my choice would be to call us Chinese Indian. So suddenly thousands of Chinese Indians who had been living a peaceful life for several decades, if not for centuries, were suddenly begun to be perceived as spies and potential traitors to India. Their decades of non-aggressive behavior and actions were to no avail, as several thousands of young and old, male and female, were asked to leave their homes at a moment's notice, sometimes in the middle of the night. So soldiers and policemen would come to their homes and would tell them that this was for their own good, and would ask them to pack their, just very few belongings and leave. Even there have been records of students. The authorities, the police here, when I'm talking about authorities, the police actually going to schools, boarding schools. A lot of Chinese students were studying in boarding schools in the hills of West Bengal. And there are, of course, cases where the school authorities actually helped. When they found out that this was what was going to happen to them, they would say that, no, we don't have any Chinese student. So, but there were a lot of students who were also taken away in the middle of the night from these schools. So they were all taken away, and they were put in jails for a temporary period, for a week or so, and then thereafter they were proceeded on to Dehradun. Now Dehradun is a small town near Kota city in Rajasthan, about 165 kilometers from Jaipur. This is the geography. It was established as a training camp for soldiers by the British authorities during the mid-19th century. Thereafter, it has not only served as a training camp, but also has been used for the prisoners of war during World War II, and later as a prison for freedom fighters, which, of course, Tansin sir has already shown us that a lot of well-known Indian freedom fighters had been incarcerated there. In 1962, it was used as a detainment camp to house several thousand Chinese Indians who were rounded up from places like Kolkata, Delhi. So Delhi is included here. I hope that's noted.
Because he was not put into jail.
Tinsukia, Kalimpong, Darjeeling, Makum, Siliguri, etc. At present, it is a regional training camp for the CISF, that's the Central Industrial Police Force. Now, I have, during my fieldwork in China, in Beijing, I had the access to the People's Daily, Renminripao, and from there I got these articles, which Chinese articles, which were talking about the arrival of these Chinese returnees back to China. So this is one article where the Deputy Governor of Guangdong Province received this 81-year-old returnee. And this is the ship. The ship was called Gonghua, and Gonghua had been used in for returnees of other countries like Indonesia and Malaysia previously. So it was again used for the Indian returnees as well. And it would dock in Chennai, and the Chinese who decided to leave would have to reach Chennai to board this ship. So these are some of the articles. There's this somebody, I forget which presenter, had talked about Nepalese wives. So this is one Nepalese wife who was reunited with her husband, who was of Chinese origin. And there again, she's been received by the Deputy Governor of Guangdong Province. Okay, back. How do I go back? Oh, anyway. So the accusations against these Chinese who were arrested for alleged suspect activities was turned on its head on 27th February 1963, when Lal Bahadur Shastri, the then Prime Minister of India, gave all the detainees a clean chit, saying that no internee of the Dehradun camp would be tried for spying or of carrying out of subversive activities. This order by the Prime Minister of India, notwithstanding, the release of the Chinese internees did not happen very soon. So it took a total of 5 years, as many speakers have already said. It took up to 1967. Now this again raises a question. I'm sorry, I'm being corrected, it took 7 years. So, I mean, it raises a question about why, when the Prime Minister of India has given a clean check to all these returnees, why it took 7 years for the government of India to release these people. I mean, that could be, researched. And maybe there was no reason, or there was just arbitrary decision that these people. I mean, they were being released, but in batches. So there were some people were released right soon after the order, whereas the last detainee was released after quite a few years. Okay. So there are actually very few people in India who are aware of this internment camp in Yori. I can see those people could probably be counted here in this room. And so there's lack of understanding, there's lack of information, what happened to this group of people who actually chose to go back to China. Can I go back, please? Okay, sorry. So now I would like to talk about the overseas Chinese farms. Now this is the Luliang. My fieldwork was in the Luliang overseas Chinese farm, which is in Yunnan province, southeast of China, and southwest. Sorry. So like I said before, these overseas farms have been set up by the Chinese government to as resettlement colonies for their such returnees and refugees from various other South Asian countries which were having trouble with their Chinese communities, as is historically documented. So the Chinese government established many of these farms from the 1950s to the 1970s for their Chinese people of Chinese origin who returned to the homeland voluntarily or under duress. These farms were a timely and effective arrangement by the Chinese government, and reflected the concern that the Chinese government had for their compatriots. I won't call citizens, but compatriots, because many were not Chinese citizens actually. Most of these 84 farms are located in the southern provinces of China, such as Fujian, Guangdong, Guangxi, Yunnan, and the Hainan Island. So these are some pictures I have of the farm. Now this house, this building that you see, is one of the first the buildings which was present in the 1950s, and it's still there. Till 2 years ago, it was still there. It's abandoned, nobody lives there, but it's still there. So if you can see that the conditions that the returnees went back to was also not very great. So this is the street in the farm, and they grow, this Luliang overseas Chinese farm grows grapes. So, but again, the land is not tilled by the returnees anymore, it is given to contracted labor. So this is where the grapes, you can see the grape fields at the back, the vines. And this is the new houses which the government is building for the returnees now. So you can see they are very well-made villa-style houses. This is actually the family of my maternal uncle, who is 84 years old now, and I saw him for the first time in my life 2 years ago. He left in 1963, and voluntarily. Okay, so this is finally the highlight of my presentation is about Lin Yue Hao. She is the lady on the extreme right. I met Lin Yue Hao during my field trip in Luliang province, and her grandfather had come to India from Guangdong in the early 20th century. She is not sure what drove him to move to India or why he finally settled down there. He married a local Assamese woman and had several children with her. One of these children is Lin Yue Hao's father, Lin Sai Ming, who's on her right. And he also married to an Assamese. He subsequently, to continue the story, in 1963, Lin Yue Hao's grandfather had been given deportation orders by the Indian authorities. He came to China on the Guanghua along with his wife and children, several of whom, including Yue Hao's father, was already married by then. Lin Yue Hao and her 5 siblings were all born in China. So when we're talking about who is a Chinese and who's not a Chinese and the facial and the biological expression of that, so if we look at Yue Hao, we can see even though she was born and brought up in China, not in India, she does not look Chinese in the strict sense of the term. So when one meet Lin Yue Hao for the first time, when I met her for the first time, I was a bit taken aback by her very Indian physical appearance in a very Chinese context. She spoke with me in Mandarin or in the and she speaks otherwise the local Yunnan dialect fluently. This, of course, can be compared to, and I was a bit shocked that, or maybe people who see her would be shocked because her fluency in the language. But I think this compares to when we as Chinese Indians speak in Punjabi or in Hindi and people are taken aback. So sometimes we use this, at least I use this to my advantage. I don't reveal it till the last minute that I do understand what's been said about me. So what is even more surprising is despite her upbringing in China, she can still speak Hindi and Assamese quite fluently. She said, and this is what really struck me, I think, is that her mother forbade the children from using any Chinese at home. So she said, once you enter the house, the mother said, that once you enter the house, you do not speak any Chinese. Whatever Chinese you are learning at outside, in school, you leave it there. Because she wanted her children to retain some part of the Indian culture, even notwithstanding the hostile environment. Not only she, but all her siblings are equally fluent in the Indian languages. Indian languages I talk about is Hindi and Assamese. They all love to watch Bollywood movies and hear Hindi film songs. Such things were very hard to get their hands on before, but now they can get some courtesy of their friends and relatives in Hong Kong. Yeah. So Lin Yue Hao grew up in the Longchang and this is her home. She's married to another Chinese Indian from Kolkata whose family also settled down in this overseas farm. She studied in the local school run by the farm administration, and her last job that she held before retiring 2 years ago was at the county toll booth. She has now settled down into a comfortable life where she receives a decent retirement pension and her husband makes a living running a small grocery shop in the village. They both own a handsome 2-story villa which was built a few years ago by them on land given to them by the government. She has no biological children of her own, but has adopted one local Chinese girl. Her daughter has learned to sing Hindi Bollywood numbers and relishes Indian cuisine made at home. Before Yue Hao retired, she owned a small plot of land and she now gives it on contractual labor. So she had to return this land back to the government to get her monthly pension. When I asked her if she would like to go back to India, Yue Hao smiled with a touch of sadness. She said she wanted to, but since she had no contacts with relatives from her mother's family, she did not know whom to visit here. She felt that she could consider going to India as a tourist, but then she was concerned that maybe her Hindi is not so good, so how will she manage there? And finally, the most important concern, I think, which would answer your question, is the cost of the trip, because she earns a minimal monthly pension, which is enough for her to live comfortably in China, but to add up to pay for such a trip with her family would take quite a few months for her to add up to. So she hopes that she can make it one day, if only to see her mother's village, and possibly to buy some saris and salwar kameezes of the latest fashion, which she really wants to wear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Severin. What's emerging here are new areas of research, and I hope, I don't see any new and new JNU students that many here. I hope they can take on some of these topics and do more research. And one of these fascinating topics is part of Pia Chaudhry's dissertation, which is food. We are all hungry, Pia, so you can feed us with your topic on memory, identity, and diaspora, discussion on Indian Chinese cuisine in Delhi. Sorry, he was Delhi. You have to talk about Delhi.
Good evening, everyone. So, as a child in an average middle-class Bengali family in Kolkata, treats at a nearby Chinese restaurant would be something that I would wait for amidst the routine humdrums of my busy and drab school life. Occasionally on Sundays, when all the family members would be at home, my mother would sometimes cook chili chicken and chow mein, and we would happily feast on our Chinese lunch. In this way, some of my fondest childhood memories were constituted around Chinese food. Then there were these occasional days, maybe once or twice a year, when we would go out to Tangra, because that's where you would get authentic Chinese food, we were told. So be it served at Chinese restaurants or be it cooked at home, as a child I always came to associate Chinese food with holidays, family get-togethers and festivities. So before I talk about this further, so this first paragraph I think is a way of explaining why Kolkata is my research topic, because I am from Kolkata, and as a researcher I think the question of access and the question of what sparks your interest sort of come together in deciding your research topic. So that's why I couldn't go beyond Kolkata. Till now I haven't been able to do it because it's beyond the scope at the moment, but it would be great if I can explore Delhi, Bombay, Assam, etc. So, just to give you a little bit of a background, the history of the spread of the Chinese cuisine around the world can be summarized in the following words of Roberts. In the years after the Second World War, a number of factors encouraged the spread of Chinese food in the West, but it was not until the late 1950s that the change gathered pace and the globalization of Chinese food became evident. By the 1960s, Chinese restaurants could be found in Turkey, where one could get a plain Chinese meal or dine in style on Chinese food at the Istanbul Hilton. In Nairobi, Kenya, there was the Pagoda restaurant, and in Salisbury, southern Rhodesia, one could find the ornate bamboo Chinese restaurant and the noisier Golden Dragon. In Addis Ababa, the China bar had become a favorite with the Ethiopian women. On the other side of the world, in Lima, Peru, which had a Chinese community dating back to the mid-19th century, the numerous Chinese restaurants known locally as chifas were patronized by a wide cross-section of the community. But the most dramatic examples of globalization were to be found in Western countries, which had a long-established Chinese population, notably the United States and Canada, and in the Western countries which had recently received the influx of Chinese people, particularly the UK. The Chinese cuisine industry in India began only after the 1950s and 60s, when the last wave of migration from China to India took place. Initially, a lot of restaurants such as Nanking and some others were concentrated in the older Chinatown in the Bentinck Street area. Kim Hwa in Baliganj and Peeping in Park Street are two of the oldest Chinese restaurants in the city. The restaurants in Tangra have come up in a big way only in the last 20 to 30 years, during which Kolkata witnessed a big boom of Chinese restaurant industry. This was mainly due to the decline in the tanning business, as a result of which many tanners shifted to the restaurant business. The city's love affair with Chinese food remains evergreen, with a new Chinese restaurant opening every now and then, and every next corner of the road. It is true that the community is shrinking quickly, and the traditional occupations of the community, such as shoemaking, laundry, dentistry, and beauty parlors, have perished or are quickly fading. However, the cuisine industry still maintains its foothold to a large extent. Gradually, one can trace an increasing growth of non-Chinese owned Chinese restaurant chains like Mainland China and Chow Man, which have been quite successful endeavors. However, there still remain a considerable number of Chinese-owned restaurants in different parts of the city, especially in the walled Chinatown in Tangra. As one enters the lanes in the area, they will encounter red Chinese lamps hanging in front of doors and restaurants, one after the other, big and small. Each one serves delicious and delectable platters of popular dishes such as Hakka noodles, fried rice, chicken Manchurian, and sweet and sour chicken. However, when one talks about the Teriti Bazaar food or the old Chinatown food, with most of the restaurants, that have been closed down there, one cannot ignore the lasting presence of the breakfast market at Territy. The Sunday breakfast, which is one of the most famous haunts of food enthusiasts. It is a place where you find delicacies like siu pao, which is baked pies in chicken and pork, siu mai fish dumplings, momos and paozis, which are steamed and stuffed buns, among others. Restaurants in Tangra, with the exception of one actually, however, do not serve any pork dishes. In fact, during the course of my fieldwork, I was met with a lot of pleasant surprise when I told my respondents that I ate everything, and pork was my favorite meat. They would sigh of relief and tell me, "Oh, then you can have lunch with us today. We have pork sausage, pork curry, and rice today." Okay. As Sin Lun Wong's words mark it, the essence of Chinese economic organization is familism. While discussing Chinese economic familism, Wong distinguishes between three aspects as its main characteristic features: paternalism, nepotism, and family ownership. The importance of the family as an institution in the Chinese entrepreneurship culture does emerge quite prominently in my ethnography. The Chinese respondents spoke at length about the time and effort that they invest in their children with proper training to run the business that the family owns. This was true in case of the small small restaurants as well as large-scale enterprises. The responses I elicited show that family was the central institution around which their business enterprises were organized, business decisions were taken, and very easily and immediately by the head of the family, who is generally the oldest male member who takes the decisions. The networks of extended family are also very well connected with each other. In case of an emergency or a crisis, the management of affairs of the restaurant was handed over to an extended kin. There were also cases where the same restaurant has more than one outlet being handled by cousins belonging to the same extended family. Okay. So here, what I'll be doing is, since I haven't started writing my chapters yet, I'll just be reading out some of my observations emerging from my ongoing fieldwork based on certain responses from Chinese Indians. And so I'll be reading out a lot of quotes from the interactions and conversations that I have had with them. So through my fieldwork, I have come to realize that Chinese owners of restaurants distinguish between at least 4 kinds of food. Food that is served in the Chinese restaurants, food that is consumed in the Chinese households, which again come to be distinguished between the Hakka style and the Cantonese style and more, and some kind of true Chinese food that is consumed by the Chinese in China. Indian respondents were unanimous on the fact that the food that their restaurants served was not Chinese. They were unanimous in their opinion that no Bengali would be able to consume authentic Chinese food. One of my respondents recollected, what you get here is Indian Chinese, and there are varieties of Indian Chinese too. If you go to Bombay, the food you will get there is different. It will be more jhal or hot. If you go to the south, you will get khatta food. It's according to what the local people eat. I used to run a restaurant in Goa. There the kind of food is totally different. Foreigner type ka khana milta hai wahan, barbecue style. This is in fact a common feature of diasporic Chinese cuisine. In all parts of the world, the Chinese make a certain kind of food whereby the local cooking traits are absorbed into their own style to suit the taste of the local consumers. While the practice boosts the saleability of the cuisine as Chinese food and is fundamentally crucial to the success of the business, the confusion that the use of the blanket term Chinese food over such a diverse gamut of cuisine breeds surfaces from time to time in funny ways. Thus, one of my respondents narrated the following incident where one Iranian gentleman who had come to eat in his restaurant in Kolkata came up to him and complained that what had been served to him was hardly Chinese food. Our Chinese restaurant owner explained, so I told him, would you be able to eat if I gave you proper Chinese food? Then I told him what you have at your place is hardly Chinese food. It is possible to proceed from this idea of local Chinese cuisine to an investigation of how the Chinese in Kolkata perceive the culinary preferences of the people non-Chinese in Kolkata. As far as the preparation technique is concerned, the general opinion of my respondents was that the Bengalis overcook their food. They would often explain to me how this elaborate cooking process robbed the food of its inherent good qualities, and how the desire to produce a particular artificial flavor how in the desire to produce a particular artificial flavor, the original flavor of the food would be compromised with. As one of them told me, when we are making dishes at home, we only cook 75% and the rest 25% is left kacha or uncooked. How can the food have its own taste when you're cooking it for so long? On the question of the flavor, the general opinion was that the locals prefer the sweet and spicy taste. They explained to me that these two perceptions have been central to the ways in which Bengali Chinese restaurant owners have molded their culinary style and catered to the Bengali taste bud for decades. Chicken sweet and sour de do unko, bas bahut khush. Thus, as was pointed out to me, the food sold in most Chinese restaurants was dominated by sweet and spicy flavors. The cook, of course, is a major factor in the production of this authenticity. In spite of this, I learned that non-Chinese, especially Bengali cooks, would regularly be employed in Chinese restaurants. To the question of whether these cooks were able to cater to the requirements of cooking Chinese food, I was told, we do recruit them, but it's difficult for them to produce what we do. However, it's not a big problem in case of business because most of the customers in the restaurants are Bengali. But somebody Chinese needs to supervise him so that whatever Chinese flavor is left can be produced. One of them said, I've never had Chinese food cooked by Bengalis, but I can understand by the very look of the dish that it's differently cooked, in fact overcooked. The way they put sauce in everything, we don't. The way you end up tasting, that way you end up tasting only the sauce, not the real food. Another Chinese restaurant owner explained to me, the control of ginger, garlic and chili is very important. The three need to be combined in order to create the perfect flavor. It is not possible for the non-Chinese to do it in proper quantity. The same is true for soya sauce. Where you have to put soya sauce and in what amount, it's important to understand that. Sometimes people just name the dish anything. Each dish should have a name according to the ingredient that is used, depicting the particular taste. Something that may easily emerge from what's being discussed here, but which one needs to steer clear of, is the binary of the Chinese and the non-Chinese food. My respondents were, however, quite conscious about the fact that the Chinese food is not a homogeneous monolithic category. Just like the term Indian Chinese food represents different types of food served across our country in faithful adherence to different local culinary cultures, and thus acts at best as a blanket term for an extremely diverse gamut of dishes. Chinese food also has different faces. They told me that the Chinese of Kolkata do not necessarily cook their food in the same manner as it is cooked by their relatives in their homeland. In this respect, the following quotations typify the response of the majority. It is also partly different from what is cooked in China, because we cook more here. In China, they would not mind having food with even a little bit of blood in it. In fact, they would welcome it as good food or ideal food. They think that is their own kind of food, but we don't like that. We cook it fully. Moreover, the Kolkata Chinese are conscious of the fact that there is more than one variety of Chinese food in the city itself. These are represented by the somewhat different cooking styles of the two main Chinatown areas of the city. My interactions with a few of the primary food vendors of the Teriti Bazar area made me aware of the way they differentiated between Tangra food and their own food. They told me that Hakkas in Tangra put in more cornstarch in their food. They also use more oil in it, and their preparations often are much more gravy. The word Tangra style often came up in their responses, clearly indicating an otherization within the community itself. Vendors of the breakfast market also fondly recall the old times when the market was much more vibrant and bustling with many more Chinese sellers. So these excerpts from my ethnography on the cuisine of the Chinese Indians reflect the various ways in which the food is consumed and presented to others. There are many factors involved in the making of this Chinese cuisine, thus making the questions of food and diasporic Chinese identity more complex and heterogeneous than we can gauge in our enthusiastic visits to the restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for not showing pictures, otherwise we would have gotten hungry. And between food and the rest of the day, Binny, you are standing there, so your last presentation before we can eat something. There's some food, right? Yeah. Come then. Billy is going to talk about the Chinese-Indian conundrum, being a Chinese-Indian today, tomorrow, and
hopefully, yeah. That is the hope of this. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. My name is Bin Ching Law. I'm actually the only non-academic. Seven was very insistent that I am. Lawrence is not an academic too, but the way he spoke. Anyways, I am a Hokkien Cantonese Chinese, as Professor Sen mentioned that Hokkien is one of the first migrants to India. My father was Hokkien, my mother was Cantonese, and I am the last of my breed in Kolkata. There are no more Hokkien families in India. Is that?
yeah, Heidi.
Darjeeling. I have been not able to locate them in Kolkata at least. There are someone outside? In that. Anyways, come to that later. I'd like to talk about this, what it means to be a Chinese Indian today. Like Professor Sen said, are we a Chinese Indian or am I Indian Chinese? That is a question that we have debated and fought over in several of our meetings of our association. Finally, we came to name our association the Chinese Indian Association. Hopefully we won the argument, but it is more complex than just a simple nomenclature. My family is slightly different from the other families in Kolkata, in the sense that my father was the only Chinese gentleman to have joined the Kolkata police to regularize the stay of his siblings and his parents. This was way back in the 40s, I think, when he immigrated from Bangladesh, where they were landlords. Since then, my family has been largely into academics, and so we were kind of detached from the community. But I come back to the question of what it means. Like when I was a child, we were a flourishing community of almost 30,000 people, according to some of the data that I saw, and my own research, and the feel of the market that Pia was just talking about. When I was a child and we entered that market, it would be teeming with Chinese sellers who were selling all sorts of genuine food, which I'm really sorry to say is not the same anymore now. Now there's a lot lost in translation, I would say, and the quality of the food is gone down a lot. And we have lots of Facebook pages where people slander the directive of market breakfast. Right now we are about 3,000 to 4,000. I think that is a more correct estimate, because we were thinking let us become a vote bank, and so that we can get our way and get some drains covered in Tangra, and get some street lights in Tangra. And then we counted, we are about 700 voters, registered voters in Tangra. So I would say that the total population in Tangra would be around 2,000, and the population in Kolkata around the same, so around 3,000 to 4,000 is a really good estimate, because 700 registered voters would not mean more than 2,000 people living over there. I thank Lawrence for one new term that we all learned, the minuscule minority. I am really taken up by this word. I feel that we have been grappling with this issue of being a minuscule minority. Who are we? We are not categorized as a minority anywhere in the Indian political system. And we have been trying to convince the authorities that we do contribute to this to society in various ways. Our status, we are indispensable to the status of the society, being the city itself, Kolkata in this case, being recognized as an internationally recognized cosmopolitan city, but with little impact, because as I just told you, we try to get some drains covered, and that's such a difficult thing to do in Tangra. Right now there are about 3 generations of the Chinese Indians living in Kolkata, and The first generation is my parents' generation, and for them it was a continuous struggle to get a better life and hopefully move out. And my generation also thinks that if we could do something, earn some money, set up something in Toronto, as somebody pointed out, we have a larger population there. And then the children, for them, in fact, just recently I read an interview where the children were interviewed. That could be a study that someone could do. Some of our children were interviewed and they said, yeah, there's nothing over here. We'd like to go out as soon as we can. What does that mean for the community? The next generation is probably going to migrate out. And most of the children, from my interaction, they really want to go away. I don't know about Delhi. In Kolkata, I would say 80% of the children will just want to leave and go as soon as they can. So, but as a community, we have so many heritage temples, cemeteries and structures all over Kolkata that as the population is dwindling, the use of those are also dwindling. So what does that mean for the heritage and architecture of the city? These buildings are going, there's no upkeep, and there's no new coat of paint. The city won't help to just get a new coat of paint. Our cemeteries are being converted into football fields. We have 9 large cemeteries in Kolkata and about an equal number of temples, which are almost 100 to 110 year old. The 9 cemeteries that I talk about, one of them is the Hopkins Cemetery. I'd like to talk about that in particular because I'm Hopkins, and this Hopkins Cemetery is spread over almost 13 bighas of land in the heart of Kolkata, right behind Tangra. If you guys know about the city, that's prime real estate right now. And it's a huge piece of land. And what has happened is because of the lack of Hopkins in the city, and because my family became Buddhists, and so we were cremating our people. The last people to be buried in our cemetery was my grandfather. And after that, somebody was talking about the lynch mob, and wanted to discuss that. But I remember clearly when I was young, my mother said, we used to visit this cemetery every year, 2 to 3 times during various occasions to pray to our ancestors. And one fine day my mom comes and said, we are not going back to our cemetery. I said, why? This was, I was just in the 12th, I think. She said, no, the local toughs over there said, don't come here anymore. We are going to set up a khatal over here. They were setting up a buffalo to get milk or something out there. So you don't have to come to pray. So if you come, we'll hit you. And this was at the time where my dad was a cop. And my dad comes and tells us, it's useless to go back. We were just about, I think at that point of time, around 10 of us. And so she said, we don't have to go back to pray over there. Now, my own journey in this community started after I came back from the US. I had gone to the US for my master's, and my parents refused to migrate. So I am one of the failures in the outward migration. I had to come back after almost 9 years because they just refused. My father just said, I was born in Bangladesh, and he was an ardent fan of East Bengal. So he said, I'm not going to go. How am I going to watch the matches? He used to visit the Salt Lake Stadium for every East Bengal match. And he used to make me wear the East Bengal red and yellow t-shirt at home. Yes, I'm not joking. He used to tell me, you wear this t-shirt, we have a match today. And so he refused, and my sister is also in the US right now, my older sister. She also came back, and when we tried to convince them that that's a much better country, we have much better things, I have a house, please come. They refused. So I came back. And one fine day, within a few months of coming back, 2 very tough looking guys came to my house. They said, we are promoters And आपका यहाँ पे बड़ा वो है जमीन है. So we don't have any land. No, it's behind this thing. And he had a stack of papers. Yeah, he's saying joint venture करेंगे. Yeah, we will build over there. I didn't know what he was talking about that point of time. And unfortunately, at that time I was totally ignorant of the community itself because I was out for almost 9 years, detached from the community. And so this guy just take a look at these papers and see this is a map of the place. There was a map of our cemetery, almost 13 acres of land, and he wanted to do something. And so he said, since you are the last of the few people, you sign on this and we will start a joint venture. I had to quietly tell him that sorry, I'm not interested. I don't even know what you're talking about. And that's when I realized that since I have not been going to that cemetery for the last almost 15, 20 years, and now this guy comes to me and tells me like this, there must be something about it. So I tried to do my field work, research work to find out about the cemetery. Just while going through that, to try to find how we can protect our culture, our heritage, my ancestors, I found out that the community is extremely divided, and the leaders of the community were separated by all the points that you pointed out. Kunshi, then they'll have the language, then they'll have the clubs, they'll have the region. Every small pocket will have a small club, and they would say, I will not talk to those guys. As far as you are concerned, you take care of your own thing. And so there was at that point of time, I realized that I cannot get a community help. Because I'm the only Hokkien, and nobody is Hokkien. So the Hakkas won't help me, the Cantonese won't help me. So I'm on my own if I have to defend this cemetery. That's when I thought about doing something that would get all of these diverse kind of people with their own egos and different thoughts about what it means to be a community, to come together. There were almost, I think, I had counted, there were about 18 clubs and associations of Chinese origin. And of these, few were really active. I'd like to talk about one particular gentleman who was the last president of the Indian Chinese Association, Mr. Xie Xing. Yeah, we know. He was the president of this association, 5 minutes. Okay. And he was the pillar behind the Big Boss restaurant. And he was the really person who was really active, and he tried a lot to do what I was trying to do at that point of time. And I got a lot of support from him. And that's how we started the Chinese Indian Association at that point of time, with the goal of being the umbrella association to get all the other clubs and associations under that. And I'm really happy to inform Mr. James over here that we have also recently formed the All India Chinese Association. I don't know if you are aware of that. And we have got membership from almost everywhere, in Delhi too. The president is from Delhi, Mr. George Shue. Yes. And so this association, the goal of this association is very similar to what the Chinese Indian Association was. So we hope that we can take it forward. And if you'd like to become members of this...
Be Delhi-centric.
No.
Being the capital.
Okay. Anyway, so I'd just like to read out 2 or 3 lines from the association. What the association is wants to do. In fact, this was one of the in one candid movement. This Mr. Xie had told me that his dream was that we all go to one place and have one big celebration for anything instead of having many small celebrations. And I think forming of these associations is a step towards trying to do that, achieve that. And as someone talking about the school too, the school is going to restart. Did you talk about it? Yeah. The hope is that now we're going to restart it. I think 15th is the day when the judgment is going to be passed. That's another story. I'd just like to read a few lines from what was established in 2015. And I'd like you to join, because the charter is there online. We have it in the, if you go to the Facebook page, you'll see the Chinese Indian Association does have the charter of the memorandum of association. And the first few things that it says is, it is to provide an umbrella platform for projecting the united face of the Chinese Indian community and protecting their community interests and heritage. This will be achieved by having member representations from all the clubs and associations belonging to any ethnic Chinese Indian group. So I hope that if you belong to any group, please, by default, the presidents of all the groups are members of our association. So if you belong to any group, you automatically become members of our group if you just send a small mail. And the hope is that we are able to bring in people, bring in some of the people who emigrated to come back and invest in India. That is another part of the thing that we're trying to work on, how to get those people back so that we do have a tomorrow in India. Thank you.
Very good. I think there's still hope left, and I think the CHOW project is working with Penny to preserve some of these heritage sites in Kolkata. I don't know if there are any heritage sites in Delhi, but I think those need to be preserved. But we'll have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A for the three presenters here. Any questions? Yes, Janani?
My question is one question for Pia on the idea of authenticity. And I was wondering whether, you mentioned this difference between hiring Bengali cooks and overseeing them to ensure that the food is somewhat authentic, even though it may not be as authentic as the one you have at home. Was there any difference drawn between restaurants that are not owned by Chinese, like you mentioned Chow Man, for example? And did the question of authenticity come up in such comparisons? So Chinese restaurants as being owned by Chinese and being authentic, and compared to the newer Chinese restaurants that are not owned by the Chinese.
Including the mainland China.
Including mainland China, yes.
Yeah.
And sorry, I have one more question, and this is for Billy. Is to what extent is having a proper land deed an issue for preserving heritage with the community? I mean, because a lot of the property is owned communally, and we saw that in the case of the Kanpur church, there was that dispute. So, to what extent is getting the land deed an issue?
Yeah. So when there were actually distinctions drawn, of course. Usually the response that comes is that, they actually don't get our cuisine, but what they do is they have more money, especially big restaurants like mainland China or Chow Man, which is growing now actually, it's quite big now. So they have the resources, so they get very fancy cooks from China initially. So they get people from there and then they train their people. And then there is this entire gossip about how the quality falls after the Chinese cook leaves. But that question of authenticity always remains in some sense or the other, because that's how it works in their perception at least. And even when I actually also did interviews with the owner of Chow Man and the owner of some other such Bengali restaurants, so he also said that so there is this growing sense of anxiety, right, among the Chinese, because the non-Chinese are growing in this particular industry. So there is this claim and counterclaim, I think, towards this question of authenticity, which becomes very important in such a given field of anxiety. So even the Bengali owners kept on saying how authentic his food is and how he gets people from China to, and he collects materials from China. He goes every year and collects spices from there, etc., etc. So it's like that.
Any?
Yeah. Just like to say that Yeah, so you're very right about the land deed. And due to lack of knowledge or information, or just the fear of taking part in anything that is to do with the government, a lot of our temples, even now, have not registered themselves as trusts. And I have been advising them again and again that you need to become a trust soon. Otherwise, what happened to Tuman can happen to you. And we have almost 9 temples, of which I think 3 of them only have proper papers. And anything can happen if they are not careful, and they really aren't careful even now. And sadly, just recently, one of the most active person who was the secretary of 3 of the temples passed away. So now I don't know what is going to happen. Just hope that we are able to protect these temples.
Yes, Arun.
Hi, Aruna Ghosh from Harvard University. First of all, thank you to all 6 presenters and Tan Center. This was actually a really fascinating and, for me, super educational experience. I work on modern Chinese history, but I really don't know about the Chinese Indian or Indian Chinese experience at all. So what I have to say is a bit of an observation or a set of comments that was generated by listening to all speakers, and has to do with this idea of I think, what we could call national physiognomy, and sort of what Lawrence said about feeling not at home when he visited China himself. I've had interesting experiences traveling around in China, and Anathansen uses this as a joke often when people ask him, where are you from? And he says, I'm Shaoshuminzu, I'm an ethnic minority. I've had people guess that I'm an ethnic minority in China, which I think would never happen, as I think as you sort of indicated, and other people have indicated, in China itself, in India itself. You're immediately made foreign. And sort of this, it's still relatively unformed, but I think it's an interesting way to think comparatively about the nation-building discourses in each country, and the ways in which then your notion of minuscule minority plays in, because you have many minuscule minorities in the way in which the Chinese Nationalities Project constructed the Chinese nation in the 50s, whereas you don't on the Indian side, barring specific examples. So it's more of a sort of an open-ended question about how do we think comparatively about this, where perhaps it's an ignorance on the Chinese side, the average Chinese side, that allows me to claim that I'm an ethnic minority, and the average Chinese might be willing to go along with that, whereas an Indian would never accept a claim like that, because there's a much stronger sense of what an Indian physiognomy ought to be. So I don't have anything beyond that. I think it's an interesting sort of comparison, and then to think about what the enumerative logics of nation building and classification are. So just to lay that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Makum. I belong to the faculty of English and Comparative Literature, University of Delhi. These days we are collaborating, writing comparative history of East Asian cultures and literatures. So that brought me here to have more education. I'm glad I could get more information about the cultural things.
Yes, Gabriel.
So when you are narrating this phrase, what is that called, return, Indian Chinese and Chinese Indian, somehow I was reminded of dual citizenship. Because I worked a lot on diaspora between Indo-Canadian, Indo-American. Then on a Pravasi Day, Government of India was proud of giving this dual citizenship to them. So I wanted to know if you also analyze it in that context.
I think the returnees, in their own mind, of course, have kind of a dual identity understanding. But when you're talking about Pravasi and, then it comes to the OCI issue and the, NRI thing, I think that is a more of an identity which is given a state backing rather than an individual's perception of oneself. So returnees is of course an official terminology which is used by the Chinese government.
Just hold on.
So, but there's no governmental kind of an identity or a state state position that a returnee has a certain kind of a card which says I'm a returnee, or like a passport which says a returnee. It's nothing like that. It's just that you belong to these returnee farms. Of course, from there, possibly I could go into the hukou system of China. It's not, hukou is kind of an identity thing in China. So you belong to a certain part of China and you can never change that. So it's never put into that you are a returnee. It's just that you are part of that association of, that administration of returnee administration which is running this whole farm there in China.
Are you sure they are not designated
No,
as a
I don't think so, no.
I just pertaining to this return issue. What happened to the properties of those people who had deported from India to China? And who took those properties of Chinese deportees? That is one question. Second question is, is there any political leadership emerging from the Indian Chinese community in, say, Kolkata or elsewhere? That is second question. Third is that, traditionally what I have just learned in the last 2-3 hours here sitting here is that most of the traditional, occupations of Chinese, they have moved away from that. So what is that new avenues where the Chinese are getting themselves engaged for their living and things like that?
Should I take the question?
Ravi, you want to wait or you want
I'll wait.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, as far as the property is concerned, it is a very good question. Again, it's very controversial. I will go out on a limb to say that as far as Delhi is concerned, again, making James happy, I will be Delhi-centric. There are a lot of very, very high-value properties in Delhi, in CP to be specific, which were either taken up by the other Chinese who were left behind, or they were taken off, or were usurped. I would use the word again, going out on a limb here, usurped by some of the locals. So this idea of what happened to the properties has to be taken into context, not only as this situation occurring as because of the war, but also there were a lot of jealousies there, local and personal, which came into play when such an opportunity arose, where people took this opportunity to take over businesses and properties of the Chinese who were doing pretty well. So I'm not pointing a finger only at locals. I'm saying it happened within the community also.
What kind of businesses are they engaged in now? Maybe building. Now that they have moved away from shoemaking and carpentry, are there people engaged in certain kinds of occupation, for example?
Yeah, they're trying to real estate. A lot of them are into real estate right now. Broking, as well as just buying land for the sake of selling as plots. So a lot of them are into that business.
Okay, and also perhaps engaged in various kinds of other IT, and they have mixed with the local population.
Yes.
Ravi, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah. We have been trying to convince people to get into the real politics, but we have not been very successful yet. As I was telling this some time back, that we had talked about how we wished we could become a vote bank and do something, get something done. But unfortunately,
have you talked to Mayan Khan?
Yes, maybe he can get some.
Yes, he is popular.
I think I'll just make a comment here.
I can't see. Where? Oh.
I'll just make a comment here. In comparison, we have a designated seat for the Anglo-Indian community in the parliament. So why can't we have one such seat for the Chinese? And they are, as much as in a minuscule minority as much as the Chinese now, I think. So, these are issues which can be debated forever. but they could be raised and thought about.
Ravi is going to solve the problem.
My name is Ravi Bhuthalingam, Institute of Chinese Studies. Fascinating afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I lived for many years in Calcutta and have very fond memories of Fatma and momos and so on. And just like to offer a couple of suggestions about the revival. I think Vinny was talking about the revival of some of the heritage areas. I remember when I was in Calcutta, Armenian community, another micro, even more micro than the
Jewish
and the Jewish. The Armenian church renovation and re-establishment happened there quite successfully. The Parsis, of course, are fairly wealthy and established, but very small also. And Jewish, as you mentioned. One thing we all did in trying to promote their sites and secure them was to tie them into the tourism circuit of Calcutta. And Calcutta, liked, and even today I think likes to promote its cosmopolitan heritage. So this might be one particular route of doing it. And also thinking somewhat out of the box. Just, I think about 10 days ago, I read a piece, it must have been out in Calcutta as well, but I read it in Delhi. There's a Park Street Cemetery had a very unusual event. It was actually orchestral music situated in the cemetery. And people were actually sitting, they didn't actually state where they sat. One suspects they sat wherever there were elevated objects. And many people might have been rather shocked by that, but actually it brought to light new uses of a very prime area of land. So I think an attempt to do this might receive good support. And also if you broadcast it around the world, you get support from all over, including heritage supporters, not necessarily just for Chinese heritage artifacts, concerned for Calcutta and people like that. There is a big movement everywhere. So I would encourage you and I fully support your activities.
Thank you so much.
The CHA project is actually about that. The CHA project that has been started.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any response, Benny, or last word is Delhi centric?
Yes. I want the Delhi-centric person.
See, my brother was, he passed out from IIT Kanpur. Maybe he was the first Ching to pass out from that.
Maybe what?
First electrical engineer.
Oh, okay.
He's from IIT Kanpur. He couldn't find a job in India. Wherever he used to go for an interview, the moment he said, he can't change his face, obviously. So he said his parents are Chinese. So that he would always get, he was fail in in the interview. So he's migrated to USA, got a scholarship from FIT Florida Institute of Technology. And my son is now in Belgium. He's running a dance school because there's no scope for us, No backing, no scope from the government, from any institute. That's a
Very bleak picture.
Yes, I think this was the reason why I think these kinds of seminars are important to educate the local people itself about the plight and the experiences and maybe some future of the community which is quite disappearing. And I think Vinny has been responsible for that. So to say anything.
Very bleak.
But we would. Last word from Srimati Chakravarti, who has.
Last word, just two very minor points. Presentations were excellent. Student, I wanted to ask you.
Take the mic.
Yeah. did you say that 1963 February Lal Bahadur Shastri as Prime Minister of India declared amnesty for the Chinese?
Yes.
That date is not correct because Shastri became Prime Minister only in June 1964. Nehru died in 64.
Maybe he was not Prime Minister then.
He was probably Home Minister.
Yeah, as Home Minister he would be
was not
probably,
Prime Minister.
yeah.
Okay, and then one.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. One bit of information to Pia. You were mentioning names of, you were mentioning places where there were Chinese restaurants in the 1960s. In Dhaka, Bangladesh, which then was East Pakistan, there was a Chinese restaurant called Cho Chin Cho. Okay, so you can do some.
On that exciting note, thank you so much for coming. Please enjoy the snacks outside. Thank you.